The first sound was the click of the handcuffs. Sharp, metallic, final. It cut through the low hum of the jet bridge like a gunshot, freezing every breath around it. Passengers stopped walking. A suitcase tipped over. Someone gasped. And standing there, one wrist already locked in steel, was Evelyn Carter. She did not scream. She did not resist. She did not beg. She simply looked at the security officer holding her arm, her eyes steady, her jaw tight, as if she were memorizing his face for later. The officer avoided her gaze. He had already decided who she was, or rather, who she was not. 10 minutes earlier, none of this existed. 10 minutes earlier, the Airbus cabin had been warm, dimly lit, smelling of recycled air and expensive cologne. Evelyn had stood at the edge of first class, one hand on the leather headrest of seat 1A, waiting. Waiting for a man who refused to look at her. "That's my seat," she had said. Calm. Even. Not loud enough to draw attention. The man finally glanced up from his phone. Late 50s, perfect hair, navy blazer. The posture of someone who had never been told no in public. He smiled without warmth. "You sure about that?" he asked, not curious, amused. Evelyn nodded once. "Yes." He leaned back, crossed his arms. "Might want to double-check. Crew already cleared me." Behind her, the aisle tightened. People slowed, watched. A woman in her 70s clutched her purse a little closer. A man 2 rows back stopped pretending to read the newspaper. Evelyn felt the familiar pressure behind her ribs. Not anger, recognition. This moment had a shape. She had lived it before. The flight attendant arrived fast. Too fast. Linda Morris, mid-40s, tight smile. Eyes that scanned Evelyn's coat, her shoes, the scuffed leather tote at her side. Linda did not look at the boarding pass at first. She looked at Evelyn. "Ma'am," Linda said, voice crisp, professional, already leaning away. "There seems to be some confusion." Evelyn handed over her phone. The screen glowed. Seat 1A, paid in full, confirmed. Linda glanced at it, barely a second. Then she turned to the man in the seat. "Mr. Collins, I'm so sorry for the delay." Evelyn felt it then. The shift. The invisible verdict sliding into place. "I'm not moving," Evelyn said, still calm, still quiet. "That is my seat." Linda's smile thinned. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." Harder. The word landed heavy. Evelyn's fingers curled once around the strap of her bag. She let go. Around them, the cabin went silent in the way only Americans of a certain age know well. Not awkward, not shocked. Watchful, calculating. A man in the aisle cleared his throat. "She showed you her ticket," he said. His voice shook just enough to give him away. Linda did not turn. "Sir," Linda said sharply, "please remain seated." Evelyn felt the heat rise now, not in her face, in her spine. She could end this. One phone call, one name. But she didn't. Not yet. Power, she'd learned, meant knowing when silence was heavier than noise. The captain appeared. Thomas Reynolds, early 60s, grey at the temples, a man who looked like he had flown through wars, strikes, and mergers. He took in the scene quickly. Too quickly. "What's the issue?" he asked. Linda answered before Evelyn could open her mouth. "Passenger refusing crew instruction, causing tension." Reynolds looked at Evelyn. Finally. Really looked. He hesitated, just a fraction. Enough that she noticed. "Ma'am," he said, measured. "Is there a problem with your seat assignment?" Evelyn held up her phone again. He leaned in. "Read it." His brow creased. "She's correct," he said slowly. Linda stiffened. "Captain, Mr. Collins is a priority customer. We can resolve this more smoothly off the aircraft." Smoothly. off the aircraft. Reynolds exhaled through his nose. The clock was ticking. Pushback windows, crew duty limits, a full cabin watching him decide. "All right," he said at last. "Let's step into the jet bridge and sort this out." Evelyn nodded. She turned, took one step. Then 2 men in dark uniforms appeared, blocking the aisle. Airport security. Big, impatient, already irritated. "Ma'am," one said, "we need you to come with us." "For what reason?" Evelyn asked. "You're being disruptive." She almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she looked past him, back at the cabin, at Linda, at Collins, now smug, already settling deeper into the seat, at the older woman with the purse, whose eyes were wet with something like regret. "I am not resisting," Evelyn said clearly. The officer took her arm anyway, and now here they were. The jet bridge cold against her skin, the handcuffs biting into her wrist, cameras out, phones raised, someone whispering, "This is wrong," someone else saying nothing at all. Evelyn closed her eyes for half a second. She breathed in. The smell of fuel, rubber, metal. It grounded her. Inside her coat pocket, her phone vibrated. Once, then again. She did not look. She already knew who it was. Her general counsel, her chief risk officer, her assistant, probably frantic by now, wondering why the final call before London had gone unanswered. The officer tugged her forward. "You don't have to do this," Evelyn said quietly. Not a threat, a statement. He shrugged. "Just doing my job." They always were. As the elevator doors closed, sealing her away from the aircraft, Evelyn Carter straightened her shoulders. Her reflection stared back at her in the dull steel wall. A woman nearing 60. Lines earned, not hidden. Eyes sharp, controlled, alive with calculation. They thought this was the end of a small inconvenience. A seat, a misunderstanding, an overreaction. They did not yet understand the size of the decision they had just made. Above them, the plane waited. Engines cooling, paperwork stacking up. Somewhere in a glass tower downtown, a conference room sat empty, lights still on, documents spread across a polished table. $5 billion in conditional funding. Time sensitive, reputation sensitive. Fragile. Evelyn opened her eyes. She'd been patient long enough. The holding room smelled like disinfectant and old coffee, the kind that had been reheated too many times and forgotten. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flat and unforgiving. Evelyn Carter sat on a molded plastic chair bolted to the floor, her hands free now, but her wrists still burning where the cuffs had been. Across from her, a security officer typed slowly, 2 fingers pecking at a keyboard as if every keystroke required approval from his conscience. He glanced up, looked at her again, longer this time. "You want some water?" he asked. "Yes," Evelyn said. "Thank you." He slid a paper cup across the metal table. Their fingers did not touch. He returned to his screen, shoulders hunched, posture defensive. The room hummed with the low throb of the airport moving around them, unseen but very alive. Somewhere above, a jet roared. Somewhere else, a gate agent called out a delayed boarding time. Evelyn lifted the cup and took a small sip. Her hands were steady. Inside her chest, however, everything was moving. Not panic, not fear. Assessment. The pieces were already lining up, clicking into place with the quiet efficiency that had carried her through recessions, hostile boards, and rooms full of men who assumed she would blink first. The door opened. Another officer stepped in, younger, eyes sharper, badge too new. He whispered something to the typist. The typist stiffened, cleared his throat, looked at Evelyn again, this time with a trace of something else. Uncertainty. "Ma'am," the younger officer said, voice polite but tight. Can you confirm your full legal name for the record? Evelyn Marie Carter, she said. Born in Baltimore, Maryland. The younger officer nodded, wrote it down, then paused. And your occupation? Evelyn held his gaze. Chief Executive Officer. A beat. The typist stopped typing. Of what company? The younger officer asked. Carter Hale Strategic Capital. Silence dropped into the room like a held breath. The younger officer's eyes flicked to his partner, back to her. Spell that, he said. She did, slowly, clearly, each letter landing with weight. The typist's chair creaked as he leaned back. Wait, he muttered, pulling up another screen. He squinted, swore under his breath, then sat up straighter. That Carter Hale? Evelyn said nothing. She didn't need to. The door opened again, this time harder. A supervisor entered, late 50s, face drawn tight with the look of someone who had just been handed a problem he did not want. He carried a tablet. His thumb scrolled fast. Too fast. Miss Carter, he said, not unkindly, carefully. There's been some confusion. Evelyn set the paper cup down. I imagine there has. The supervisor swallowed. We're verifying a few things. Take your time, she said. Accuracy matters. Another pause. The supervisor's tablet buzzed.
He read. His jaw clenched. He nodded once, sharply, as if responding to a voice only he could hear. Then he looked at her again, and now the shift was unmistakable. Ms. Carter, he said softer, would you be willing to wait here just a bit longer? Evelyn smiled. It did not reach her eyes. I'm not going anywhere. Across the airport, in the first-class cabin, Richard Collins loosened his tie and exhaled in satisfaction. The tension had drained from the air like a storm passing. The seat was his, the space reclaimed. Linda Morris leaned in, voice low, conspiratorial. Sorry about that mess, she said. Some people just don't know when to back down. Richard chuckled. It's always a test, isn't it? Linda smiled, relieved, eager to please. She offered him a drink. He accepted. Whiskey. Neat. 2 rows back, the woman with the purse stared straight ahead, jaw tight. The man with the newspaper folded it slowly, deliberately, then set it aside. He did not touch his drink.
The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady, rehearsed. A minor delay, paperwork, nothing to worry about. In a glass conference room downtown, 3 floors below a skyline of steel and reflected sunset, a group of men and women sat around a long table, coffee cups untouched, jackets draped over chairs. A wall clock ticked loud enough to be heard. This is getting uncomfortable, one of them said. Grey hair, 60s, a banker who had survived more downturns than he liked to remember. She hasn't called. She was supposed to confirm by tonight, another added. Without her lead position, the whole syndicate freezes. A younger analyst tapped at his laptop. I'm seeing chatter, he said. Not public yet. Internal channels. Something about a security incident at JFK. The room went still. What kind of incident? Someone asked. The analyst swallowed. Passenger removal. First class. The name hasn't circulated, but the timing lines up. A woman at the end of the table closed her eyes.
Jesus, she whispered. Back at the airport, Evelyn's phone buzzed again. This time she took it out. A message from her general counsel. 1 line. Are you safe? She typed back. Physically, yes. Then another message from her chief risk officer. Press is circling. Do not comment. She did not reply. The supervisor returned. His face was pale now. Ms. Carter, he said, we'd like to apologize for the inconvenience. Inconvenience? She repeated. Yes, he said quickly. You are, of course, free to go. Evelyn stood. The room seemed to shrink around her as she rose, tall, controlled, deliberate. "Before I do," she said, "I want to be clear. This did not begin here." The supervisor nodded too fast. "Understood." "Good," she said. "Then you'll also understand why this doesn't end here." He opened his mouth, closed it again. As she stepped out into the terminal, the noise rushed back in. Announcements, wheels on tile, voices layered over voices. She moved through it like a current, untouched, eyes forward. People looked at her now, really looked. Some recognized her, some sensed the shift without knowing why. Her phone rang. She answered without slowing. "Evelyn," said the voice on the other end, her chief investment officer, calm but tight. "We have a situation." "Yes," she said, "we do. The airline's liquidity is thinner than they admitted. One of the secondary banks just flagged a concern. If we pause, even temporarily, it triggers a review." Evelyn stopped walking. She looked out through the glass at the waiting aircraft, lights blinking, engines quiet. "Then we pause," she said. A breath. "That will cascade." "I know. And the board will ask why." She thought of the jet bridge, the cuffs, Linda's smile, Richard's laugh. "Tell them the truth," Evelyn said. "Tell them trust is a risk multiplier. And tonight, that risk just changed." She ended the call and stood there for a moment longer, watching the plane. From here, it looked small, manageable, fragile. Up above, Richard Collins took a long sip of whiskey and leaned back, unaware of the quiet recalculations unfolding beneath his feet. The engines were about to start. The doors would close. The aircraft would push back. But the deal that mattered most was already moving. The aircraft door closed with a hollow thud that echoed down the cabin like a verdict. The sound settled into the bones of the plane, final and indifferent. In first class, seat 1A reclined fully as Richard Collins adjusted his jacket and glanced around, satisfied. The delay was already fading into anecdote. Another minor inconvenience smoothed over by status and confidence. Linda Morris moved down the aisle, posture restored, voice light again. "We'll be pushing back shortly," she said, offering practiced smiles. Her eyes avoided the empty space where Evelyn Carter should have been. The absence felt louder than a confrontation.
The captain's voice followed, calm and controlled, announcing departure clearance. Outside, the tug engaged. The plane shuddered, then began to move. Across the terminal, Evelyn stood at the edge of a glass wall overlooking the runway. The reflection staring back at her looked older than it had an hour earlier. Not weaker, sharper. Her phone rested in her palm, vibrating in steady intervals, like a pulse she no longer needed to check. A man approached from her left, late 60s, dark overcoat, airline executive posture. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Miss Carter," he said quietly. "I'm Harold Stein, Operations Oversight." She did not turn. "I know who you are." He exhaled. "Then you know why I'm here." "Yes," she said. "You're here to see if I'm angry." Harold hesitated. "Are you?" She turned now, looked directly at him. "I'm precise." That landed. He nodded once. "We'd like to make this right." "You can't," she said. "Not tonight." His shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly.
The board is already asking questions.
"They should," Evelyn said. "They approved a service culture that confuses deference with judgment." He swallowed. "The passenger involved is a high-value client." "So am I," she said. "The difference is, I don't announce it." Silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Behind the glass, the plane turned toward the runway, lights blinking like a slow heartbeat. Harold spoke again. "If you pause the funding, even briefly, it could destabilize things." Evelyn watched the aircraft align. "That instability already exists," she said. "I just made it visible." Her phone rang again. She glanced at the screen. Board liaison. She declined the call. Then another. syndicate partner. Declined. Harold shifted his weight. May I ask what you intend to do? She considered him for a moment. You may, she said, but I won't answer. She stepped past him, heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Each step carried weight now. Not spectacle. Gravity. Inside the cockpit, Captain Reynolds scanned his instruments. All green. Clearance granted. Yet something sat wrong in his chest. A low pressure he couldn't name. He thought of the woman's eyes. Not pleading, not angry. Measuring. He pushed the thought aside and advanced the throttle. In the cabin, Richard Collins glanced at his phone. No signal yet. He smirked and leaned back as the plane accelerated. He imagined the meeting waiting for him in London. The numbers, the applause, the way rooms went quiet when he entered. He did not notice the man across the aisle watching him. A retired union negotiator, 72 years old. He had seen that look before. The look of someone who thought the board was already won. The plane lifted. Tires left the ground. Applause rippled weakly through the cabin. The city dropped away. At the same moment, Evelyn stepped into a quiet corner of the terminal and finally returned a call. Go ahead, she said. The voice on the other end did not waste time. If you formally suspend the lead commitment, the secondary lenders will freeze within hours. Yes, Evelyn said, and the airline will breach its short-term liquidity threshold. Yes, and that will trigger regulatory scrutiny. She closed her eyes briefly. Also yes. A pause. You understand this could ground aircraft? I do. Another pause. Then say it. She inhaled slowly. Suspend the commitment. The line went silent. Then, understood. She ended the call and stood still, feeling the shift ripple outward. Not dramatic, not explosive. Subtle, like ice cracking under weight it could no longer carry. Minutes later, deep in the airline's operations center, a junior analyst stared at his screen. Numbers flickered. Alerts stacked. He frowned, refreshed, frowned again. He said, voice cracking slightly. We've got a problem. Supervisors gathered. Phones rang. A red banner appeared on the main display. Funding review initiated. In London, it was already past midnight. In New York, the night was just getting started. Back in first class, Richard's phone vibrated as the plane leveled off. Signal restored. He glanced down, expecting routine updates. Instead, his smile faltered. 1 missed call, then 3, then 7. A message from his assistant blinked at the top. Call me immediately. He felt a flicker of irritation, then unease. The woman with the purse closed her eyes as the plane cruised eastward. Somewhere deep inside, she knew. This wasn't over. It was only changing shape. Evelyn Carter walked out of the terminal into the cool night air. A car waited, driver attentive, door open. She paused before getting in and looked back at the sky, at the disappearing lights of a plane carrying people who believed the story had already ended. It hadn't. It was just moving into the part where decisions begin to matter. The first alert hit the operations center like a cough no one wanted to acknowledge. A single chime. Soft. Easy to dismiss. A junior analyst glanced at his screen, frowned, then refreshed it. The numbers didn't correct themselves. They tightened, compressed, like a chest under pressure. Hold on, he said, leaning closer. His voice carried the pitch of someone trying not to panic. We just lost confirmation on the bridge facility. A supervisor looked up. Which bridge? The lead one. That got attention. Chairs scraped. Coffee went untouched. Screens multiplied the same red line across the room, spreading like a rash. In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds adjusted his headset and listened to a crackle of incoming data. Nothing urgent. Yet. Still, his jaw clenched. He had flown long enough to know when silence wasn't calm. It was waiting. In the cabin, Richard Collins had stopped smiling. His phone buzzed again, then again. The messages stacked fast now, no longer polite, no longer vague. "We need to talk. Where are you right now? Answer me." He stared at the screen, pulse quickening. Around him, the cabin settled into cruise. Glasses clinked, a blanket rustled. The illusion of comfort held. Across the aisle, the retired negotiator watched Richard's face drain of color. He didn't say a word. He'd learned long ago that men rarely recognized the moment they stopped being in control. They only recognized it afterward. Back on the ground, Evelyn Carter sat in the back of the car, hands folded loosely in her lap, city lights sliding past the tinted windows. She listened as her chief risk officer spoke in clipped sentences, each one building on the last. "The secondary lenders are already hedging," he said. "They're not pulling yet, but they're bracing. That means rates spike by morning." "Good," Evelyn said. A pause. "Good. It means they were already nervous," she replied. "This didn't create fear. It revealed it." The line went quiet. He understood her now. That made it worse. At airline headquarters, a conference room filled at an hour when no one wanted to be there. Executives arrived, half-dressed in confidence, half-dressed in denial. Ties loosened, jackets forgotten. The chief financial officer stood at the head of the table, fingers pressed flat against the glass. "We're not insolvent," he said too quickly. "This is a review. Reviews happen. Not like this," someone else said. "Not mid-flight." A lawyer cleared her throat. "If the lead investor pauses, even temporarily, the language in the covenants allows counterparties to reassess exposure." "Reassess," the CFO snapped. "Or run." No one corrected him. In London, phones rang in dark apartments. In New York, emails stacked up unanswered. The airline stock dipped in after-hours trading. Not a crash, not yet, just a tremor, the kind experienced investors noticed immediately. In the sky, turbulence rattled the cabin. The seatbelt sign flicked on. A few passengers murmured. Richard tightened his grip on his phone as another message came through. This one from his managing partner. "You did not tell me she was on that flight." Richard's mouth went dry. He typed back fast. "Who?" The response came instantly. "Do not insult me." The plane shuddered again, harder this time. A drink tipped over. Apologies followed. Laughter too loud, forced. Richard leaned forward, heart pounding. He scrolled. News alerts were beginning to surface. Not headlines yet. Whispers, finance blogs, anonymous posts. Lead funding under review. Airline exposure flagged. Governance risk questioned. He looked around the cabin, suddenly aware of how thin the walls were, how temporary the comfort. In the operations center, the junior analyst swallowed hard. "We just got a notice," he said. "Fuel credit at Heathrow is being re-evaluated." That word again, re-evaluated. A manager slammed his hand on the desk. "Get me the board, all of them." At the same moment, Evelyn's car pulled into a quiet garage beneath a building of steel and shadow. She stepped out, coat draped perfectly, expression unreadable. Inside the elevator, she finally allowed herself a breath. Slow, controlled. The kind that steadied a hand before signing a document that would change lives. Her phone rang again. She answered. "They're asking for reassurance," her chief investment officer said. They want a statement, something calming. Evelyn watched the numbers climb on the elevator panel. Tell them reassurance comes after accountability, she said, not before. The doors opened onto a silent floor. Her office lights were already on. Someone had anticipated this night. Back in the air, the captain's voice cut through the cabin, steady but strained. A minor routing adjustment, weather, nothing to be concerned about. The retired negotiator closed his eyes. He had heard that tone before. It meant someone, somewhere, was scrambling. Richard's phone buzzed again. A final message from his partner. She froze the deal. He stared at the words until they blurred. The cabin felt smaller, hotter. He loosened his collar, then froze as a new alert appeared. Regulatory inquiry initiated. No, he whispered. Across the aisle, the old man opened his eyes and looked at him. Their gazes met. For a brief moment, something passed between them. Recognition. Judgment. History repeating itself. On the ground, in a quiet office overlooking the city, Evelyn Carter stood at the window and watched the night pulse below. Her assistant approached cautiously. They want to know if this is personal, she said. Evelyn did not turn. Everything is personal, she replied. That doesn't make it irrational. She picked up a folder from her desk. Inside were documents she had hoped not to use. She flipped it open anyway. Somewhere over the Atlantic, a plane flew east, heavy with people who believed momentum would protect them. Beneath it, markets adjusted. Phones rang, decisions hardened. And Evelyn Carter, long underestimated, stood exactly where she needed to be as the consequences of a single moment spread outward, touching everything. The first call came from London while the plane was still dark against the stars. Not to the captain, not to the cabin. Straight to the airline's treasury desk, where a tired associate stared at the caller ID and felt his stomach sink before he even answered. We need confirmation, the voice said. British, precise, no small talk. Is the lead commitment active or suspended? The associate hesitated. Just long enough. That's all I needed, the voice replied, and the line went dead. In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds felt it before he heard it. A subtle shift in the tone of the radios. Fewer jokes, more clipped phrases. Operations asking questions that should have been settled hours ago. He kept his voice steady, hands light on the controls, but his mind kept drifting back to the jet bridge, to the woman's eyes, measuring, calm, as if she had already moved on while everyone else was still deciding what this was. In first class, the cabin lights dimmed further. Night mode. The illusion of peace deepened. Richard Collins stared at his phone as if it had betrayed him. Messages came now without pretense. Risk committee convened. Trading desk pulling back. Do not make statements. He swallowed hard. He had played these rooms for decades. He knew how storms formed. This one wasn't loud. It was organized. Across the aisle, the retired negotiator shifted in his seat and watched the pattern. He had spent his life reading rooms where men pretended everything was fine until the gavel fell. This felt familiar. Too familiar. On the ground, Evelyn Carter's office hummed with quiet urgency. No shouting, no panic. Screens glowed, people moved with purpose. Her chief legal officer stood near the conference table, jacket off, sleeves rolled. They're asking whether the pause constitutes a material adverse signal, he said. Evelyn nodded. It does. That will trigger cross defaults. I'm aware. And the press. They'll come. He studied her face. You're comfortable with this? I'm prepared for it, she said. There's a difference. She moved to the table and placed both palms flat on the wood. The room stilled. Listen carefully, she said. We are not punishing. We are documenting. Every decision tonight must read clean 6 months from now. Assume subpoenas. Assume hearings. Assume someone will try to paint us as reckless. Her chief risk officer spoke up. And if they do? Evelyn met his eyes. Then we show them the timeline, the warnings, the culture they ignored. Silence followed. Not doubt. Alignment. Back at headquarters, the airline's chief financial officer paced in tight loops. He had loosened his tie, but not his tone. "This is a misunderstanding," he kept saying, as if repetition could turn it true. "We smooth this over by morning." The general counsel shook her head. "The language doesn't allow smoothing. It allows response." "Response to what?" he snapped. "A customer service issue." She looked at him. "An incident involving a lead investor removed by security." "That's not customer service. That's governance." Phones rang. Someone muted a screen showing after-hours trading. The line was moving down, not collapsing. Yet. In the sky, turbulence returned. The seatbelt sign chimed. The captain made an announcement. His voice was calm, but the words were thinner now. "Administrative routing. Minor delay." Richard Collins barely heard it. He was reading an email from compliance. Subject line, blunt. "Internal review required. Effective immediately." He stared at it, then at the empty space where his confidence had been. He typed back with shaking fingers. "This is temporary." The reply came fast. "Nothing is temporary when regulators are watching." His breath shortened. He glanced around the cabin, suddenly aware of the eyes he had ignored earlier, of the quiet judgment sitting 2 rows back. On the ground, a producer at a financial news network leaned toward her monitor. "We're getting confirmation," she said. "Lead investor froze funding after removal incident at JFK." Her editor raised an eyebrow. "Name?" "Evelyn Carter." The editor paused. "Get legal, then run it." Back in Evelyn's office, her assistant stepped in, phone pressed to her chest. "They're calling from the airline," she said softly. "Board level." Evelyn did not answer immediately. She looked out at the city, at the lights, at the traffic still moving, unaware. "Tell them I'll speak in the morning," she said, "after the facts are public." "They won't like that." "They shouldn't," Evelyn replied. In the cockpit, a message printed out on thin paper. Captain Reynolds tore it free and read. His jaw tightened. "Fuel credit review pending." He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them and keyed the mic. "Operations," he said. "Confirm status." The reply crackled. "Delayed, cautious, stand by." Stand by. He had flown long enough to know what that meant. In first class, Richard's phone vibrated again. This time it was a number he knew too well, his managing partner. He answered. "What did you do?" the voice demanded. Richard opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "You told me she was a nobody," the voice continued. "You told me she was noise." "I didn't know," Richard said. "She didn't look." "Stop," the voice snapped. "Just stop." The line went dead. The plane flew on, engines steady, unaware of the calculations unfolding beneath it. Over the Atlantic, data crossed cables. Decisions hardened. Positions adjusted. In Evelyn's office, the television came on without sound. Her face appeared on the screen. A still image from a conference years earlier. Composed, unyielding. The headline beneath it scrolled, "Lead investor freezes $5 billion commitment after removal incident." Evelyn watched it for a moment, then turned away. "We're not done," she said quietly. Her chief legal officer nodded. "No," he said. "We're just visible now." Back in the cabin, The retired negotiator leaned back and closed his eyes. He thought of the woman who had stood her ground without raising her voice. He thought of the men who had mistaken quiet for weakness. He had seen this pattern before. It never ended well for the loudest person in the room. Richard Collins stared at the dark window. His reflection ghosted back at him. For the first time in years, he felt small. Not because of the altitude, because of the math. On the ground, Evelyn Carter picked up her phone and sent one final message. Proceed. Somewhere far above, a plane carried consequences eastward, while on the ground, a single decision continued to unfold, indifferent to status, blind to excuses, exact in its reach. The first instruction came quietly, buried in an internal system update that never reached the public feed. No headline, no alarm, just a shift in priority codes that made screens in the airline's operations center change color. Yellow to amber, amber to red. A dispatcher leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. He had been here long enough to know what red meant. It didn't mean crash. It meant scrutiny. And scrutiny, in this business, was lethal. Confirm Heathrow fuel credit, he said into his headset. Static. Then a voice, careful. Credit line is under conditional review. How conditional? Another pause. Conditional on confirmation of lead liquidity support. The dispatcher closed his eyes. Which we don't have. No, sir. He muted the line and stood up slowly, as if sudden movement might make the problem real. In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds stared at the thin strip of paper, still warm from the printer. He read it again. Then once more. His co-pilot noticed the change in his breathing. What is it? She asked. Nothing yet, he said. He folded the paper and slid it into the side pocket. But his hands were no longer relaxed. They rested heavier on the controls, fingers pressing just a little too hard. In the cabin, the mood had shifted. Not visibly, not yet. But people felt it. The air had weight. Conversations dropped into whispers. Even the clink of ice in glasses sounded out of place. Richard Collins sat rigid now, whiskey untouched. His phone lay face down on the tray table, as if it was something alive that might bite him. He had stopped checking messages. They no longer needed to be read. He knew what they would say. Across the aisle, the retired negotiator adjusted his blanket and studied Richard with quiet focus. He saw the signs. The set jaw, the fixed stare, the posture of a man trying to outrun consequences that had already found him. On the ground, Evelyn Carter sat at the head of her conference table, jacket off now, sleeves rolled to the forearm. The room was filled, but no one spoke unless she asked. That had not been her rule. It was theirs. Her chief operations officer slid a folder toward her. We've mapped the exposure, he said. If the airline breaches overnight covenants, counterparties will step back automatically. No calls required. Evelyn flipped through the pages. Timelines, flowcharts, names she recognized, names she did not. And if they try to blame this on us? They will, her general counsel said. But they can't make it stick if we stay inside the lines. Evelyn nodded. We stay inside the lines. She leaned back, eyes lifting to the ceiling for a brief moment. Not exhaustion, calculation. Then she leaned forward again. Draft a memo, clear, factual, no adjectives. We paused because governance risk increased. Period. What about the removal incident? Someone asked. That speaks for itself, Evelyn replied. We don't need to dramatize what is already documented. In another part of the city, a senior regulator listened to a summary read aloud over speakerphone. He did not interrupt. When it finished, he asked one question. Did the investor act within contractual discretion? Yes. Then my interest is procedural, not punitive. The call ended. The room exhaled. Back at airline headquarters, the chief executive officer stood at the window overlooking the runway. Planes lined up like promises he could no longer keep. His phone buzzed again. He didn't answer. "They want a statement," the head of communications said, voice brittle. "The story is spreading." "What story?" the CEO snapped. "The story where we removed the wrong person." Silence followed. Then a low, hollow laugh. "We didn't know who she was." "That's not the defense you think it is," the communications head said quietly. In the sky, the seatbelt sign chimed again. The captain's voice followed, steadier than he felt. "Slight delay. Weather over the Atlantic corridor." The words landed flat. Richard Collins closed his eyes. His mind replayed the jet bridge, the woman's stillness, the way she hadn't argued, hadn't pleaded. He had mistaken restraint for weakness. It was a mistake he had encouraged others to make. His phone buzzed despite itself. He flipped it over. Margin review pending. He swallowed. The math ran itself in his head. He had leveraged certainty. Certainty that the deal would close. Certainty that nothing unexpected would disrupt the narrative he had sold upstairs. He had bet on a world that no longer existed. On the ground, Evelyn's assistant stepped closer. "There's a request," she said, "from the airline board. They want to speak tonight." Evelyn considered it. "Tell them tomorrow," she said, "after markets open. They're worried about opening." "They should be," Evelyn replied. She stood and walked to the window. From this height, the city looked orderly, predictable. She knew better. Systems didn't fail loudly at first. They failed politely, with emails, with meetings, with reassurances. Her phone rang, an unfamiliar number. She answered. "This is Thomas Reynolds," the voice said. The captain. Tired, measured. "I wanted to say I should have done more." Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. She heard sincerity, not desperation. "You should have," she said. "But you didn't. And now we both live with that." A pause. "What happens next?" he asked. "That depends on whether your company learns," Evelyn said. "Or explains." She ended the call gently. Over the Atlantic, a message finally came through to the cockpit. Clear, unambiguous. Fuel credit not confirmed. Prepare contingency. Captain Reynolds stared at the message. His co-pilot read it over his shoulder. "We may have to turn back," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Stand by." In first class, a flight attendant passed with a tray. Richard waved her away. His hands were shaking now. Not enough to be seen, enough to be felt. Across the aisle, the retired negotiator watched him and thought of all the men he had seen lose power not in a blaze, but in increments. A vote here, a clause there. Always stunned that gravity applied to them too. On the ground, Evelyn Carter returned to her seat and opened a fresh document. She typed the first line herself. "Effective immediately." She paused, then continued. The night stretched on. In the sky, in offices, in quiet rooms where decisions were no longer hypothetical. Momentum had shifted, not violently, irreversibly. And Evelyn Carter, once dismissed at the edge of a cabin aisle, now sat exactly where leverage belonged, watching the consequences move through a system that had mistaken her silence for absence. The announcement came without warning, stripped of ceremony and softened language. No apology, no explanation that could withstand scrutiny. Just facts, delivered with the careful tone of someone trying not to start a fire while standing in gasoline. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain speaking." The cabin went still. Even the hum of conversation died. People who had lived long enough to recognize trouble felt it settle in their stomachs before the words landed. Due to an administrative and fuel authorization issue, we will be returning to New York. Please remain seated while we coordinate our approach. A pause, long enough to be noticed. We apologize for the inconvenience. The word inconvenience fell flat, bouncing uselessly against the silence that followed. Then the cabin erupted. Not chaos, confusion, anger edged with disbelief. A woman in her 60s pressed her hand to her chest. A man across the aisle swore under his breath. Someone laughed sharply, the sound brittle and wrong. Richard Collins felt the blood drain from his face. He stared forward, unmoving, as if the announcement had hollowed him out. His phone vibrated again, insistent now. He didn't need to read it. The plane wasn't turning back because of weather. It was turning back because of math. Across the aisle, the retired negotiator leaned back and closed his eyes. He had spent decades watching deals collapse, not when people shouted, but when systems quietly withdrew their consent. This was one of those moments. Flight attendants moved through the cabin, voices low, rehearsed. They offered water, reassurance, nothing concrete. Linda Morris avoided eye contact now, her composure cracking at the edges. Her hands shook slightly as she steadied a tray. She felt something slipping, not just control, meaning. In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds coordinated with air traffic control, his voice professional, clipped, drained of warmth. He had never turned a plane around for this reason before. Mechanical failures were straightforward. Weather was honest. This was different. This was a decision made far below cruising altitude, in rooms he would never enter. On the ground, in Evelyn Carter's office, the television finally came alive with sound. A financial correspondent spoke carefully, eyes flicking to a teleprompter that had been updated too quickly. Sources confirm that a major funding commitment to the airline has been suspended following a security removal incident involving the firm's chief executive earlier this evening. The camera cuts to an older photo of Evelyn. Neutral background, controlled expression. The kind of image networks used when they knew they were about to say something that mattered. Her assistant muted the television instinctively. "Phones are lighting up," she said. "Everyone wants a comment." Evelyn did not look away from the screen. "They can wait." Her chief legal officer stepped closer. "The airline board is asking for an emergency call." "They're not ready yet," Evelyn said. "They're still looking for a story where this isn't their fault. And when they are..." She turned then. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. "They'll call again." Back in the air, the plane banked west. The motion was gentle but unmistakable. Reality pressed in. People noticed. A man stood despite the seatbelt sign, his voice sharp with frustration. A flight attendant guided him back down, hands firm now, fear slipping through her professionalism. Richard finally picked up his phone. Dozens of missed calls. Messages from partners, analysts, lawyers. He opened one. His managing partner again. "We are exposed. Your name is everywhere." His chest tightened. He typed back slowly. "This was not my decision." The reply came immediately. "That is irrelevant." He looked around the cabin, suddenly aware of how visible he felt, how small the space was, how little his tailored jacket mattered now. The seat he had fought for felt absurd beneath him, a prize from another lifetime. 2 rows back, the woman with the purse leaned toward her husband and whispered, "I knew it." Her voice was not triumphant. It was tired. The sound of someone who had watched this pattern repeat itself across decades. At airline headquarters, the boardroom filled again, this time without denial. The chief executive officer stood at the head of the table, jacket off, tie abandoned. His voice cracked when he spoke. "We are out of options." The general counsel nodded. If the lead investor withdraws permanently, we cannot bridge the gap. We need her back, someone said. We apologize. Publicly, privately, however she wants. The communications head shook her head slowly. This isn't about language anymore. It's about trust. Silence followed. Then the CEO sank into his chair. For the first time that night, he looked his age. In the sky, Captain Reynolds received final confirmation. Fuel authorization at the original destination would not be extended. The return was no longer precautionary.
It was mandatory.
He closed his eyes for a brief moment, then spoke into the microphone again. His voice carried something new now. Not apology. Acceptance. In first class, Linda Morris retreated to the galley, her reflection staring back at her in the metal panel. She thought of the woman she had dismissed. The calm, the restraint, the way she had not argued when everything in Linda's training expected argument. The realization crept in slowly, unwelcome and sharp. She had never asked who the woman was. She had assumed. The plane descended toward New York, heavy with fuel and consequence. Outside the windows, the lights of the city rose to meet them, indifferent and vast. On the ground, Evelyn Carter watched the flight tracker on her tablet. The arc curved west. The icon reversed direction. She exhaled once, slowly. Her assistant spoke carefully. They're asking again. Evelyn nodded. Tell them I'll meet them at the airport. A pause. Tonight? Yes. The assistant hesitated.
They won't be prepared.
Evelyn's expression did not change. Neither was I. The car ride back to the airport was quiet. The city slid past, unaware that one airline's fate was being recalculated in real time. Evelyn watched it all without sentiment. This was not vengeance. This was consequence. As the plane touched down with a heavy thud, a murmur rolled through the cabin. Applause broke out, then died quickly, embarrassed by the circumstances. The seatbelt sign stayed on longer than usual. Richard stared straight ahead, his reflection warped in the dark window. He had boarded believing he was untouchable. He landed knowing he was not. The doors opened, the jet bridge extended. Passengers stood, restless, angry, confused. And waiting at the end of the bridge, flanked by quiet figures in dark coats, stood Evelyn Carter. No coat of authority, no announcement, just presence. The woman Linda had dismissed. The investor they had underestimated. The variable they had failed to account for. As passengers stepped off and recognized her, a hush spread, thicker than any confrontation. Eyes widened, whispers followed. Evelyn did not smile. She did not need to. The story had moved beyond misunderstanding. Now it was about reckoning. The jet bridge smelled of metal and rain, the sharp scent of cooling engines seeping through the seams. Passengers stepped forward in uneven lines, their earlier outrage curdling into confusion as they saw her. Some slowed, some stopped entirely. A few looked away, ashamed, without knowing exactly why. Evelyn Carter stood still, hands clasped in front of her, posture relaxed but unyielding. She did not block the exit. She did not raise her voice. She let people come to their own conclusions. That was always more effective. Linda Morris emerged near the front of the line, face pale, eyes darting. When she saw Evelyn, she froze. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to the space between them. The hum of the terminal faded. The weight of the evening pressed in. I didn't know, Linda said finally. The words came out thin, defensive. If I had known, Evelyn held up a hand, not abrupt, controlled. That's the point, she said. Her voice was even, low enough that only Linda heard. You shouldn't have needed to know. Linda swallowed. Her shoulders sagged. the authority she had worn so easily now slipping away. I was following procedure. No, Evelyn replied. You were following instinct, and you trusted it over evidence. Linda's eyes glistened. She nodded once, as if accepting a verdict already passed. She stepped aside, allowing the line to move. Richard Collins came off next. He did not see Evelyn at first. He was too busy arguing into his phone, voice tight, clipped. I don't care what legal says. This is going to blow back on all of us. He stopped short when he looked up and saw her. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The air between them felt charged, brittle.
Richard's face drained of color, then flushed, then settled into something like resignation.
Evelyn, he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This got out of hand. She regarded him calmly, took in the loosened tie, the strain around his mouth, the faint tremor in his hand. It usually does, she said. I didn't know who you were, he said quickly, as if that explained everything. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. You keep saying that. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, there was nothing he could sell, no narrative that helped him. He stepped past her, shoulders hunched, moving faster than necessary, as if distance alone could undo what had already happened. The retired negotiator followed, slower, deliberate. When he reached Evelyn, he stopped, met her eyes. I'm glad you stood your ground, he said quietly. So am I, she replied. He nodded once and moved on.
Beyond the bridge, the airline station manager waited, flanked by two executives who looked like they had aged a decade in a few hours. Suits rumpled, faces drawn. They straightened when Evelyn approached, uncertainty written into every movement. Miss Carter, the station manager began, breathless. Thank you for agreeing to meet us. I didn't agree, Evelyn said. I was already here. A flicker of panic crossed his face. Of course, the board is assembling now. The chief executive officer is on his way. Good, Evelyn said. He should hear this directly. They led her into a small conference room near the terminal, glass walls offering no privacy. Staff moved past outside, slowing to glance in. Phones were raised, messages sent. Inside, Evelyn took a seat at the head of the table without asking. No one challenged it. No one would have dared. The chief executive officer arrived 10 minutes later, hair disheveled, jacket in hand. He stopped short when he saw her. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by something heavier. Respect. Or fear. It was hard to tell. Miss Carter, he said, I want to start by apologizing. Evelyn looked at him steadily. Apologies are not my concern. He nodded. Then tell me what is. Governance, she said. Judgment. Culture. You operate a public trust and treat it like a private club. He opened his mouth to respond, but she continued. You empowered people to decide who belonged based on comfort, not contract. You rewarded volume over verification. And tonight, that cost you credibility. The room was silent. The executives exchanged glances, each calculating their own exposure. The funding pause, the CEO said carefully, has created serious risk. It revealed serious risk, Evelyn corrected. The difference matters. He rubbed his temple. What will it take to restore your confidence? Evelyn leaned back, folding her hands. First, accountability. Not symbolic, actual. Second, structural change. Independent oversight on passenger removal decisions. Third, transparency. You will state publicly why the funding was paused. The CEO hesitated. That will invite scrutiny. Yes, Evelyn said. It will. And if we do these things, then we talk, she said. Not about restoring what was, about building what should have been. The door opened quietly. An assistant leaned in and whispered something to the CEO. His face tightened. "The press is outside," he said. "They have your name. They have video." Evelyn stood. "Then we're done here for now." She moved toward the door. The executives rose instinctively, unsure whether to follow. She paused at the threshold. "One more thing," she said. "This was never about a seat." The CEO looked up. "Then what was it about?" "About who pays the price when systems fail," Evelyn said. "Tonight, it won't be the quiet ones." She left the room. Outside, flashes lit the corridor. Questions were shouted. Names called. Evelyn walked through it without breaking stride, security falling in around her, not to protect her from harm, but from interruption. As she stepped into the night air, she glanced once at the terminal behind her, at the airline logo glowing against the dark, at the people inside, still trying to understand how quickly the ground had shifted beneath them. Her phone buzzed. A message from her chief investment officer. "They are asking when we resume talks." Evelyn typed back. "When they finish listening." She slipped the phone back into her pocket and got into the waiting car. The door closed softly. The engine started. Behind her, the terminal buzzed with aftermath. Ahead of her, the city waited. The story was no longer about what had happened on a plane. It was about what would change because of it. Morning broke without mercy. The city woke up hungry for answers, and the screens filled before coffee finished brewing. Headlines sharpened overnight, stripped of qualifiers, heavy with consequence. Video loops played on repeat. A woman being escorted off a plane, her face calm, her posture unbroken. Commentary layered on top, louder than facts, thinner than truth. Evelyn Carter watched none of it. She sat at the long table in her office, blinds half open, the skyline washed pale by early light. Around her, the room was awake in the disciplined way crisis demanded. Laptops open, legal pads filled, voices low, focus absolute. Her chief legal officer stood near the window. "The airline issued a statement at 6:15, he said. "It's defensive. Procedural language, no admission." Evelyn nodded once. Expected. "They're also saying the funding pause is temporary." "Then they're lying," she said, not unkindly. "Or hoping language will buy them time." Her chief investment officer slid a tablet across the table. After-hours trading closed down double digits. Credit rating agencies moved them to negative watch before the market opened. "Good," Evelyn said. "The market understands signals better than people." A knock sounded at the door. Not sharp, careful. Her assistant entered, face composed, but tight around the eyes. "Richard Collins is downstairs." The room stilled. "He says he needs 5 minutes," the assistant added. "Alone." Evelyn did not answer immediately. She looked at the faces around the table. Trusted, experienced, human. "Give us the room," she said. They moved without question. When Richard was brought in, he looked smaller than he had the night before. Same suit, wrinkled now. Eyes red. Confidence stripped down to something raw and unpleasant. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, voice hoarse. "I know I don't deserve it." Evelyn gestured to the chair across from her. He sat, hands clasped too tightly. "I made a mistake," he continued. "I misjudged the situation. I misjudged you." She waited. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said. "I thought it was a seating issue, a misunderstanding." Evelyn leaned back slightly. "You thought it was small because you've never been small," she said. "That's not a crime, but it is a liability." He flinched. I never intended. Intent is irrelevant, she said gently. Impact is not. Silence settled between them. Heavy. Instructive. My firm is exposed, Richard said finally. We structured positions assuming the deal would close. If you pull permanently, there will be consequences. Evelyn's eyes did not leave his. There already are. He swallowed. I'm asking for a path back. She considered him, not with anger, with clarity. You don't get one from me, she said. You get one from your partners, your board, your conscience, if any of them are still listening. He nodded slowly, accepting the truth as it landed. Then tell me this, he said. What do you want? Evelyn stood, walked to the window. The city below moved as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She spoke without turning. I want systems that don't require heroes. I want processes that don't collapse when someone makes a convenient assumption. And I want people who confuse access with authority to stop being surprised when access runs out. Richard closed his eyes. I can't undo last night. No, Evelyn said, but you can learn from it. He rose, hesitated. I'm sorry, he said. The words sounded smaller than he probably intended. She turned then, looked at him fully. I know, she said, and meant it. When he left, the room filled again. Advisors returned. The day accelerated. At Airline headquarters, the board convened under fluorescent lights and pressure. Faces drawn, voices strained. The chief executive officer spoke carefully, as if each word might be audited later. We are facing a credibility crisis, he said, not a liquidity one. Yet. The general counsel shook her head. Those are not separable.
Our director leaned forward. We need her back. Yes, the CEO said, but not at any cost. Phones buzzed. A screen lit up with live coverage. Protesters outside the terminal. Shareholders demanding calls. Regulators asking questions that did not come with answers attached. In Evelyn's office, her phone rang. The airline's CEO again. She answered this time. We're prepared to make changes, he said quickly. Immediate ones. Which ones? Evelyn asked. Leadership, training, oversight. Names, she said. A pause. Then, names. Real ones, not symbolic, not disposable. Put it in writing, Evelyn said, publicly. And the funding, he pressed. She exhaled. One step at a time. By midday, the story had shifted. Analysts spoke less about the incident and more about governance, about risk models that failed to account for culture, about the cost of silence. Evelyn stood at the edge of the office as the sun climbed higher. She felt the weight of the moment. Not triumph. Responsibility. Her assistant approached quietly. They're ready when you are. Evelyn nodded. Then let's be ready. Down the street, in a boardroom that no longer felt secure, decisions were made that would ripple outward for years. Careers ended. Policies rewrote themselves. Quiet understandings dissolved under scrutiny. And in the middle of it all, a woman once dismissed at the edge of an aisle held steady. Not because she wanted power, but because power had finally noticed her. The day wore on. Markets closed, statements were issued, apologies attempted, some sincere, some not. Evelyn returned to her desk late in the afternoon and opened a clean page. She wrote a single sentence at the top. Accountability precedes capital. She underlined it once. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, systems adjusted. And somewhere between the two, the lessons settled into place, not as spectacle, but as structure. This was not the end, It was the part where change stopped being optional. The boardroom smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold coffee, the kind of room designed to project confidence, even when none remained. Evelyn Carter sat at the far end of the table, hands folded, spine straight, eyes level. Across from her, the airline's directors had taken their seats one by one, each carrying a different version of the same fear. The chief executive officer arrived last. He did not rush. He knew better. Rushing suggested weakness. But the tension showed anyway, in the way his shoulders failed to settle, in the way his fingers tapped once against the leather folder before he forced them still. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was steady, practiced. "We understand the gravity of this moment." Evelyn did not respond immediately. She let the silence stretch, not as a tactic, but as a reminder. Silence, she had learned, was the only thing powerful men were never trained to withstand. "This moment began before last night," she said finally. "Last night only exposed it." A director cleared his throat. Another shifted in his chair. The CEO nodded slowly. "We accept responsibility," he said. "We failed to ensure judgment aligned with policy." "No," Evelyn replied. "You failed to ensure policy aligned with humanity." The words landed cleanly. No heat, no flourish, just fact. She opened the folder in front of her and slid a single document forward. "This is my position," she said. "Not a threat, not an ultimatum. A consequence." The CEO scanned the page. His eyes moved faster than his expression allowed. When he finished, he looked up, the lines around his mouth deeper now. "You're asking for control," he said. "I'm asking for stewardship," Evelyn answered. "Control is what you already had. Stewardship is what you lacked." A murmur moved through the room. One director leaned toward another. Someone exhaled sharply and stopped. Evelyn raised a hand, not to silence them, but to anchor the moment. "This is not a punishment," she said. "It is a correction. I am prepared to reinstate the $5 billion commitment under revised governance, phased oversight, and immediate leadership changes. Not symbolic ones, structural ones." The CEO sat back. "And if we refuse?" Evelyn met his gaze. "Then the market finishes what it has already started." He knew she was right. They all did. The past 24 hours had taught them a brutal lesson in leverage. Money did not shout. It simply withdrew. Minutes passed. The room weighed options that were not really options. Finally, the CEO closed the folder and nodded once. "We accept," he said. "Effective immediately." Evelyn inclined her head. No smile, no relief, just acknowledgement. By afternoon, the announcement rolled across the wires with the weight of inevitability. New governance structure, leadership departures, oversight committee formed, funding restored in stages, analysts recalibrated, investors exhaled. Employees watched from terminals and break rooms, trying to understand how one night had redrawn the shape of their company. Evelyn stood alone in the lounge overlooking the runway as planes lifted into the pale sky. Her phone buzzed constantly. Messages of congratulations, of gratitude, of quiet confession from people who had seen themselves in the woman escorted off the plane and felt something shift inside them. Her assistant approached. "There's someone asking to see you," she said, "off the record." Evelyn nodded. Richard Collins entered slowly, eyes downcast now, confidence replaced by something more honest. "I won't take much of your time," he said. "I just wanted to say I resigned this morning." Evelyn studied him. "That was your decision?" "Yes," he said, for once. She said nothing. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he added. "I don't think that's how this works."
I just wanted you to know I understand now. Too late, maybe, but clearly. Evelyn considered him for a long moment. Understanding is not nothing, she said, but it's not a currency. He nodded. I know. When he left, the lounge felt quieter, lighter. Evelyn returned her gaze to the runway. A plane rose smoothly into the air, unburdened, heading east. Another followed. Life continuing, as it always did. That evening, she walked out of the terminal without escort, coat draped neatly, expression composed. People recognized her now. Some smiled, some looked away. Some simply watched, absorbing the idea that power did not always announce itself with noise. She paused once at the curb, breathing in the cool air, the scent of asphalt and jet fuel. The world felt different. Not because it had changed overnight, but because something invisible had been named. At home, she poured a glass of water and sat by the window as the city settled into dusk. The phone lay silent for the first time in days. She did not turn on the television. She did not need the replay. She knew what had happened. A woman had been underestimated. A system had revealed its cracks. And instead of shouting, instead of pleading, she had used the only language institutions truly understood. Ownership. Evelyn finished the water and set the glass down. Tomorrow would bring new negotiations, new resistance, new tests of resolve. That was fine. She had never believed justice was a single moment. It was a discipline, a habit, something you practiced, even when no one was watching. She looked out at the lights one last time and allowed herself a small, private breath of satisfaction. Not triumph. Closure. If this story resonated with you, show your support with a like, subscribe for more stories like this, and share your thoughts in the comments by writing 3 simple words. Justice wins. Always.